always had a soft spot for the Pentax 645. It was the first camera that I owned when I got back into film photography, and for years now I've always wanted to own another one. This classic has long been known as one of the best entries into the world of medium format, and for good reason. The Pentax 645 that I originally owned was the first version with its funky display and push-button shutter speed adjustments. But this time I decided to go for its more refined sibling, the Pentax 645N. I haven't really had much of a chance to shoot with this camera yet after getting it, so today I'm gonna head out to one of my favorite places to shoot, which is this old junkyard full of vintage cars. And I'm gonna do just a bit of an initial review on this camera with plans of doing a longer term review at some point in the future. But very quickly after just handling this thing, I can tell there's a good chance that I'm gonna love it. The original Pentax 645 was a very popular camera, and it took 14 years for Pentax to release an updated version, the 645N. The N model came with updated controls, ditching the push buttons for more familiar dials, slightly updated ergos, multi-segment metering, a self-timer, and the big feature, autofocus. So you definitely pay a price for those upgrades though. The original Pentax 645 you can get for a couple $100 still in good condition, whereas the N version you're closer to the $400 to $500 range. For me, the autofocus wasn't a must-have, but all of the features together and the newer age of the body made the price difference worth it. So really early initial impressions. I've only shot 5 images so far, but just loving this camera. Super portable, the automation is great. It's just been really fun to kind of walk around and handhold this camera and create some images. This place, as you can see, is just pretty crazy. I just came into the forest here and there's these 2 cars, and it's like this everywhere here. So you'll see something like this and then you'll look beyond and there'll be another and another, and it's almost endless. So should be fun. Only bummer is the sun is starting to come out. I was really hoping that it was going to stay overcast or cloudy. It's just definitely a little more challenging to shoot here when it's sunny. But regardless, going to make the best of it and see what I can find. The package that I purchased came with the 75mm 2.8 FA lens, which is the autofocus version. Most packages you find for sale will often include the 75mm 2.8A, which is the manual focus equivalent and the more common of the two. I figured if I'm gonna purchase the autofocus camera that I'm definitely gonna get the autofocus lens, but if that's something that's not really that important to you, you could always save a few bucks and get the A version. And from everything that I've read, both versions are pretty much identical optically when it comes to quality. I've always really enjoyed the 645 format, and for a couple of reasons. The first is definitely the aspect ratio, and for some reason I've just always really enjoyed the little bit of extra width of 645 when compared to 6x7. The second reason is the amount of frames you get, and on the 645N, Pentax managed to squeeze 16 frames on a roll of 120, which is pretty awesome. Even though the resulting negative isn't as nice as 6x7, it's still a really, really nice step up from 35mm, and it has a lot more potential when it comes to scanning and printing. And on top of that, for me, a big thing is the 16 frames that you get out of a roll of 120. I find that it definitely brings back some of that freedom to roam that I experience when I'm shooting with 35mm, and I'm not as worried about counting down how many frames I have left. So one more image left on this roll, the first roll. It's given me a really good opportunity to get a feel for this camera, and overall, so far, I'm really, really loving it. Usually when I come out here, I'm shooting on my RB, so this has been a nice change just with how portable it is, and I've been using the autofocus and then also the matrix metering. So really curious to see how accurate both of those are. There is one thing though that's been bugging me quite a bit, and that's this small eye cup that comes with the camera. So the viewfinder itself is really bright and nice to look through, but you can't actually press your eye right up against the viewfinder without the edges blacking out a little bit. So a little disappointing because it is really nice to look through. One of the first things I buy will probably be the larger Pentax eye cup to try and solve that issue. When it comes to the viewfinder, there is one important thing I want to talk about, and that is manual focusing. So since the 645N is an autofocus camera, it doesn't have a split image or a microprism for manual focusing, whereas the original 645 has both. But one of the knocks that I've read about the original camera is that the viewfinder itself is pretty dim, whereas the 645N has a really nice bright viewfinder. So just something to keep in mind if you're looking at the two. And on top of that, for the N, you can buy Pentax accessory screens, both a split image and a microprism if you want to upgrade at some point in the future. When it comes to image quality, I've always loved Pentax glass. From their vintage Super Tacumers to their more modern offerings, in my opinion, Pentax can compete with some of the best. After shooting 2 rolls of film throughout the day, I was really impressed with the look from the 75mm FA lens. The internal metering also performed really well with no significant under or overexposure, and the autofocus was pretty much bang on in every image except for one, which very well could have just been me missing the point when I was focusing. From a spec standpoint, when you're comparing the Pentax to other brands, one of the downsides can be the fact that it doesn't have interchangeable film backs. So if you load a roll of film in, you're pretty much stuck with it until you're done that roll. For me, this isn't a huge deal just because I usually stick to 1 or 2 film stocks for most of my work, but if you're someone that likes to swap film out mid-roll, it's definitely something to keep in mind. So where does this camera fit for me? My RB67 is my go-to for my portfolio work because of the larger negative size. But that being said, I still always carry a 35mm camera with me as a backup, and sometimes I use it when I want something a little more portable. The only downside with that though is that I'm often not that happy with the size of a 35mm negative, and I definitely feel limited when I try and work some of those images into my portfolio that was mainly shot on 6x7. The Pentax 645 may just be my answer for that problem. Yes, it's definitely larger than my 35mm setup, but so far after shooting with it for the day, I'm falling in love with the ergonomics, how it feels in the hands, and the usability of it. And the most important part of it all is that the negative size has a lot more potential when compared to 35mm. So I could definitely shoot some serious work with this camera and not feel as limited when it comes to pairing it with other work that I shot on my 6x7. Time will tell, but this camera may be one of my new favorites. It takes a lot of the things that I loved about the Fuji GA645 and also gives me that SLR viewfinder that I'm always talking so much about. I'm realizing pretty quick why this camera was such a hit for so many years.